Victoria 3's first major patch looks set to impress. First, though, of course, it's important to note that there are wider changes coming to Victoria 3 next year to warfare, historical immersion, and diplomacy. However, what we're really looking towards is this patch 1.1. The big patch update that the developers have previously made clear will primarily focus on game polish, bug fixing, balancing, AI improvements, UI work, and a variety of other things that we've already discussed, like improvements to people's needs, legitimacy of governments actually working, and strategic resource layouts being expanded. This is particularly useful, they argue, for a later game, where everything gets a little bit messy. Well, today we heard probably the most significant news of all for Victoria 3's first major update and the big patch that we'll be releasing this year. And in this final sectional update for patch 1.1 in the developer's diary that just released this morning, they covered off changes involving warfare, the military, wages, and governing. I think this is going to really interest you. A lot of you anyway. For starters, they talk about the rework of morale. Why rework morale? Well, in essence, it's about making battles snappier and faster so that they move across front lines better and prevent them from stalling. One piece of feedback they've received a lot is how frustrating it can be to watch long, drawn-out battles that tie up your battalions on a front line, while battalions that aren't in the fight are being whittled away by attrition. Their goal then here, they stipulate really clearly, is to make battles come to a more rapid conclusion so that the front line can move along more quickly, and maybe increase some things like supply, morale, reinforcements, that kind of thing. They want that to have a more significant role. So in a new system, instead of the losing side typically being the only side to take morale damage, both sides will take a certain amount after each round of combat. The morale damage can be modified by various factors, technology, production methods, those things that we already know have an impact on whether we'll win or lose in Victoria 3. And the side that's taken the most casualties will suffer, as you should expect, an additional multiplier of morale damage, ensuring that your combat superiority is ultimately what wins it out. Now, on a practical note, in the game, the basis for how much morale is lost every day is determined by the organization or ship class for our naval units production method inside of the groups or conscription centers, naval bases, whatever it is that you're trying to train. The more modern the method of warfare, the lower you'll lose morale. And conscripts, by the way, now also differ a little bit from regular battalions in that they'll suffer more morale damage. A nice change, I think. If we have a look at a practical example, these conscripts have a relatively high base morale loss of 15 men a day. This is being reduced a little bit, as you can see, by national militia. The morale losses increase somewhat from currently being in a battle where more casualties have been inflicted on them than what they've dealt to the enemy. They are the losing side. When all remaining men in the unit have been lost to casualties or morale loss, the battalion will detach from the battle, and once fighting has concluded, the commanding general's experienced diplomat trait will increase the speed by which their morale recovers. Morale will also recover along with fresh reinforcements, of course, from the conscription center that is supporting it as well. It's an interesting take and a rework on morale in Victoria 3 to try and add a little bit more diversity and depth to the combat system, reward us more for better trained, better supplied units, and we can see some interesting modifiers playing out as well. Of course, ones that we already knew and hopefully loved: first aid, field hospitals, or bad modifiers like broken supply lines or commanders who are reckless, all impacting morale. But the morale damage you take can also be modified by the enemy's forces. Production methods like siege artillery, chemical weapon specialists, or more wrathful traits. When battles start, units are now deprioritized to enter combat if they are injured or demoralized. I've got to be honest, I thought that would have already been the case. Anyway, what this means is that even if you end up with fewer than your full complement of battalions in a fight, the rest of them will make use of the short rest to recover for the next one. Basically, you may not end up with all your troops this time, they've got to recover. They're low on morale, they need a rest. It makes sense, I like it a lot. I hope you're enjoying the Sokoto background gameplay, by the way, but moving swiftly along, a slightly related change, but this one impacting more than just the military. Government wages have been buffed, nerfed in the upcoming 1.1 patch. These were buffed, now they're being nerfed back down again. Basically, the approval rating on the government wages side that helped the intelligentsia or the PB's approval has been nerfed. It used to give us up to a +5 on their approval. It's been toned down a little bit now. It's +1 at that first stage, and then +2 at the high end. Basically, increasing or decreasing government wages will have less of an impact on their approval than it has currently at the 1.06 patch. Important to note here, however, that the act of raising or lowering wages still has the usual knock-on effects on their approval, their purchasing power, changes to standard of living, and radicalism. However, the real change to wages here actually comes to the military group, where their wages now impact a lot more than just their training rate. Here you can see what the new very high ranking for military wages does. Morale recovery, armed forces approval like last time but now at +2, 30% military wages increase, helping their purchasing power, and +20% to your army power projection as well. Recovering morale faster than the enemy does will of course be worth your time. It'll give your officers and servicemen a better overall standard of living, which may build loyalists within the armed forces, and of course an increase to their wealth may help increase their clout, their overall power in your internal political system, maybe helping them overthrow certain interest groups over time. Moreover, low military wages will affect our building's training rate, how quickly we can reinforce battalions or flotillas that have become underpowered due to casualties. Overall, low government wages provide a direct impact on our prestige as well, while of course those higher levels now provide us with some additional authority to throw around. Speaking of authority, the final piece to this puzzle of military and governance that's coming to the changes in patch 1.1 revolves around legitimacy in government. This time, the legitimacy changes are focused on solving one specific problem. Basically, and in particular under democratic systems, currently in Victoria 3 it's very easy to just put the two largest parties into a coalition government together, increasing your legitimacy, the speed within which you can pass laws, and the variety of laws that you can pass. It's altogether too easy to just put in two opposing parties and push through a whole load of legislation, and that doesn't really make a lot of sense. To adjust this in the patch, they've changed the legitimacy penalty from the government size to one that actually represents ideological coherence. Adding a party or interest group to government will now cause conflicting ideologies outside of the existing party boundaries to cause a legitimacy penalty. So if you put two conflicting political parties in, you're going to suffer a legitimacy penalty. Here we see an in-game example of what that looks like, and as a reminder, legitimacy of course is being reworked in other ways. There are now levels to legitimacy, and if you're right down the bottom like this one is moving towards, you won't be able to pass laws at all. A completely illegitimate government basically can't do it. What you can see here is that despite representing the majority of clout and votes in Britain, an unholy alliance between what is in this government the Tories and the Whigs is too incoherent to form a government. You could still form it, as they have done here, but the penalties, as you can see, are so enormous that you can't pass any laws. Your legitimacy is simply too low. You can see penalties rolling in from all sorts of things, government principles to laws around citizenship, church and state, migration, and overall penalties from being a monarchy and having wealth voting. It's really actually quite interesting to see not only how different parties with different ideologies now won't work together, a great change by the way, but also how all of the different laws are affecting the legitimacy of the government. So with that legitimacy and clout and militarism behind us, what can we expect next? The big question probably on everybody's minds. The changes that we've discussed in this and in the previous two diaries from last week and the week before are, quote, just a fraction of the changes that you'll see in the new update. This is probably the biggest news of the day. These ones may be the most visible, but there are a number of under hood improvements and bug fixes to come as well. And next week, we're going to go through the full changelog. So, if you haven't already subscribed, here is a shameless plea to subscribe and join me next week, where we'll cover off every single change coming in patch 1.1. We know that patch 1.1 will be releasing before the end of the year. They've said that time and time again. And with the full changelog being discussed next week, which will be, crazily enough, the start of December, it seems likely that the full patch will roll out in the days, maybe 1 or 2 at the most, weeks to follow. And of course, the changes that we discussed today are important to note, part of wider changes that are still coming in the future of Victoria 3. And so the changes that we had today were the military ones, the most visible, quote, military changes coming to patch 1.1. And of course, earlier on, we discussed changes to quality of life, etc. We remember, of course, this roadmap, which I showed you at the start of this video, if you haven't joined me in previous videos where we've discussed it a little deeper, where wider changes coming likely next year to Victoria 3's subsequent patches after 1.1. We'll look at things like historical immersion, diplomacy, adding really important things like being able to exchange land, further diplomatic options, so on and so forth. Where this relates to today's changes, of course, are actually around warfare, the wider changes to the warfare system that are coming to Victoria 3. Here they are on your screen, at least as outlined by Paradox a few weeks ago. These further changes will be needed to provide a more extensive military system. As a quick reminder, of course, they're looking at things like controlling front splitting so that we can have multiple theaters fighting on multiple fronts, visualizing the overview of the military situation better, including better visibility of navies and how admirals work, and overall improving unit selection for battles, balancing overall progression along fronts and the ability to set strategic objectives. Now, of course, all of this will be best overlaid on top of the changes that we've discussed today, changes to morale, to reinforcing, to the overall military system in Victoria 3. And I, for one, will look to the future and look forward to wider changes to the warfare system. Thank you very much for joining me today in this, what seems to be the final part or progressional update to patch 1.1 coming to Victoria 3 in December of 2022. I will, of course, continue to cover all of the updates for Victoria 3, so long as you're interested in watching them. Thank you very much for joining me today for some spicy Sokoto gameplay in the background as well. Maybe there's a future Let's Play involved in that after I finish my career series at the moment. I don't know. Either way, thanks so much for watching, everybody, and I will see you all next time.